What I want to do now is talk about the Constitution of the United States briefly. Why? Well, because we're Christian folk, and we live in this world down here on land, this cosmos, as I was saying yesterday, if some of you are with me. Cosmos mentioned 79 times in the book of John alone. We talked about what the cosmos is. Here we are, Christian folk living down here in the realm, the world order of the devil himself. How do we get by in this world order? How do we survive? Well, God has delegated, as we prayed a while ago, thy delegation of rights, thy spheres of jurisdiction come. Well, we've had that happen. And men here on this land, we call America, got together with the delegated authority that was given to the militiamen individually, and they established governments, state governments, and then a general government, as our forebears used to call it, the general government in Washington, D.C. Why did they call it the general government? They didn't call it the federal government so much. They called it the general government. Well, they called it the general government because it had, and still should have, and does have, as a matter of law, extremely, exceedingly narrow and limited jurisdiction. What's jurisdiction? Well, that's the right to act respecting a given matter. Our Constitution has a narrow, limited jurisdiction. Oh, you've heard it said that John Adams, our second president, said that our Constitution of the United States is for a moral and religious people, and it is unfit for the governance of any other. Our Constitution is written for a moral and religious people. And the only religion he had in mind was Christianity, but he said that. Unfit for the government of any other. Well, wait a minute. I've heard entire lectures on that quote from John Adams talking about how we are governed by the Constitution of the United States. Let me tell you something flatly and clearly. We are not governed by the Constitution of the United States. No, that's not really it. No, the government is governed by the Constitution of the United States. The commands of the Constitution, the limiting phrases and words are to limit the government of the United States, to rein in the government of the United States, to, as it were, pin the government in a pin, which the government can't get out of or doesn't. Well, if it does get out of it, we're hurting. You get my point? The Constitution of the United States is not written to govern me or you or the militia, the men that put it in place, the militiamen, we the people, it says, that's the militia of the several states, 13 at that time. They wrote that to govern the government, those officers of government, not them. And then added the Bill of Rights to make sure to drive another stake into the heart of the idea. This is not to limit us. No, we have freedom to speak. Freedom, that's the First Amendment. Freedom to not speak, that's the Fifth Amendment. Freedom to carry a loaded gun. That's not governing me, that's governing the government. That's a statement to the government. Here's the line. We're drawing a line. You can't go any further. Here's your jurisdiction. The Constitution of the United States lays it out in the specific powers of the government. That's our Constitution of the United States. Has it failed us? No, it hasn't failed us. I mean, that'd be as silly as saying, by analogy, has the Bible failed us just because nobody cares about it? No, the Bible hasn't failed us. Not at all. And neither has our Constitution of the United States failed us. Our Constitution of the United States, John Adams said, was written for a religious and moral people and not fit for the governance of any other. Oh, I like John Adams, but let's get real. Men are men. Men are mortals. Men are wound up and bound up in their own whims and difficulties. You read the story of the life of John Adams, what will you discover? You'll discover a man that is wound up and bound up in his own difficulties, his insecurities, his sin, that God used. That's what you find. And not everything that John Adams says is true. Well, that statement is fundamentally untrue. Constitution, the men that drafted it, and you're saying, well, he's the one that did it. I don't. Just because he did it, and then he says something the opposite of what he did and intended, isn't that what men do? Aren't we inconsistent? And we drive and strive to be consistent, and I know he did too. God used him, but no, that statement is not fundamentally true. It's fundamentally untrue. Do I think he was trying to lie? No. Our Constitution of the United States has not failed us. We have failed the principles of our Constitution of the United States. That's the problem. The Constitution of the United States has put machinery in place. It's all there. It's written down, just like in the Bible is written down. It's all there. The platform of the Republican Party is all there. Aren't paying much attention to it. The Republicans don't pay that much attention to it. Does that mean the platform of the Republican Party, as they've written it out, failed them? No. Don't think our Constitution is well, by analogy, our Constitution, its hand has not failed us. Its hand is still strong. What is our Constitution of the United States? I hear people talking about how the drafters, 55 of them, 55 of them. Out of the 55, most all of them were proclaimed Bible-believing Christian men. About 25 of them, I believe it was right at 25, were graduates of what we would call today Bible colleges. Well, there weren't any colleges in America that weren't Bible colleges from that day forward for decades. That's all that we had. And Christian folk were the only ones that ever started colleges in America. Then they got the idea they get the taxpayers to pay for them later. Oh, deists. So they were deists. Well, you might take about 3 or 4 of them and say maybe, but even those you can't say were deists. A deist is somebody that denies that God has revealed anything. God has revealed anything to mankind in the way of his word. And all of them believe that God had revealed things to mankind in the way of his word. So they weren't deists. A deist believes that God sets the universe up and winds the clock and walks away. There wasn't a man involved in the Constitutional Convention that believed that. I mean, even Tom Jefferson, even though he cut parts out of the Bible, he still believed that the gospel records were worthy and from God, even though he cut out the miracles of Jesus Christ. So no, they weren't deists either. They believed that God was active in the affairs of men. To a man, they did. Our Constitution hasn't failed us. The men that drafted it weren't as important. They did draft it. They weren't as important as the men that ratified it. What does it say? It says we, the people, we're the ones that are doing this. Who, the people, the militia of the several states. So let's put to bed in our minds any idea that our Constitution of the United States has failed us and we need to alter it, change it, or get rid of it and get a new one. And let's instead learn what it is. What is it? It is a brief of common law government. It's an attempt to put in place, keep in place what they already had. It's an attempt to keep in place what they already had, just change the actors. Do we have a king? Of course we have a king. We call him the President of the United States. What's the difference? We limit our king to 4 years. What is a king? It's a common law office. To be commander-in-chief of the armed forces in case of invasion or insurrection. Well, what does our Constitution say? Well, that's exactly what it says of the president. He has the authority to mobilize the militia of the several states or any part of them in cases of invasion or insurrection. That's an ancient doctrine that goes way back. Centuries, not decades. So far back, it goes so far back that its origin is lost in the fog of antiquity. Our Constitution of the United States is a brief of common law government, number one. Number two, it hasn't failed us any more than the Bible has failed us. Just because people don't believe the Bible, don't pay any attention to the Bible, does not mean it's failed us. The machinery is in place for Christian folk. The Bible's there. The Constitution of the United States is there for Christian folk. It's a brief of common law government. Our common law is the way things are, the way God has made them, the relationships that he has established. That's it. And that's the way it is. These are the laws of nature. Is it from God? Yes. Our common law is from God. We recognize it. It's unwritten. We make mistakes with it sometimes. The Bible, we don't make mistakes with that because it's written. We didn't write it. We're observing what it says. That's the Bible. That's the final court of last resort. But our common law has this authority. When we look at it, we see how the Bible, the Word of God written, how the rubber of the Word of God written meets the road of life in particular applications. That's our common law. And our common law is the procedure, the process. The Bible gives us the substance. Our common law gives us the form. And without the form, the substance is utterly useless. I used that illustration yesterday. The form is the cup. The liquid inside is the substance. Without the form, I couldn't drink the liquid. This is Brent Allen Winters, commonlawyer.com, and this is In Church. And this raises another question we're going to talk about next. The difference between the substance of the law and the application.